Hello, my name is Afradio Salmon Mijage from Edukea Tanzania. Welcome in this session to proceed with our fifth topic in Form 5 history, which is the external influence and the rise of nationalism and the struggle for independence. So, on the last session, we ended on looking the short explanation about Angola and Mozambique, how they used the armed struggle to attain their independence. And we saw various political parties which were formed that were participated in the struggle for independence in both countries, Angola and Mozambique. So now we are going to see the reasons for armed struggle in Angola and Mozambique. The first reason for the use of armed struggle in Angola and Mozambique were the banning of nationalist movements. Portugal banned all nationalist movements in these colonies because she was not ready to grant independence. To mean that Angola and Mozambique, as were the Portuguese colonies, to mean Portugal banned all nationalist movements that could appear in those colonies because Portugal was not ready to grant independence to those colonies. And the nationalistic movements in Mozambique were operating from outside, and this complicated the struggle for independence. Thus, the Africans had to resort to the use of armed struggle. As we can see that Mozambique, all the nationalistic movements in Mozambique were taking place from outside, and that complicated the struggle for independence. That's why the people of Mozambique decided to resort to the use of armed struggle in the struggle for independence, as well as in Angola. The same thing was applied. But another was the perception of Portuguese. The perception of Portuguese. Portugal, like France, always argued that she had no colonies in Africa, but overseas provinces that were part of Portugal. It means that Portugal or Portuguese were believing that in Africa she had no colonies, but overseas provinces, and these provinces or African overseas provinces were part of Portugal. So Portugal claimed that these territories had no rights for independence. So this position forced the Africans to use armed struggle to acquire independence. Due to the claimation of the Portuguese that the African overseas provinces were regarded as their territory, so they were not ready, or those colonies or that province had no right to get their independence, and that's why made Africans to use armed struggle to acquire their independence. But also, the reason number 3 was Portugal was poor. The Portuguese were the poorest, or were poor in European countries. So Portugal was a very poor, therefore she depended heavily on her colonies for wealth. Due to this predicament, Portugal could not grant independence to Angola and Mozambique, forcing the Africans to use armed struggle. To mean that the Portugal was poorest country in Europe, so they depended much, or she depended much on the overseas colonies, as she called them as overseas provinces and her territory. So they were not ready to grant independence, fearing to lose the wealth and all resources which were present in our colonies in Angola and in Mozambique. So that's why attracted the Africans to use the armed struggle or guerrilla war to fight against the Portuguese in order to grant their independence. Another was the richness of the colonies. It means the Portuguese colonies were rich. It means that they were blessed with plenty resources. A colony such as Angola was so rich in terms of raw materials, particularly all of that the Portuguese were not ready to grant its independence. Hence, the only solution left was to use armed struggle. It means that like Angola was rich in terms of raw materials, whereby Angola was providing plant resources or natural resources that were needed by the Portuguese. So the Portuguese were not ready to grant independence to Angola. Hence, the people of Angola decided to use armed struggle to fight for their independence. But another one was Portugal was a fascist state. Portugal was a fascist state that was a country that did not believe in democracy to make matters worse. She believed in the everlasting civilizing mission in Africa. Hence, she could not grant independence to Angola and Mozambique when the civilizing mission was incomplete. So you can see that Portugal was a fascist state that was not believing in democratic matters. So she believed that overseas province or territories were still under civilization mission. So she was not ready to grant independence to Angola and Mozambique because the civilizing mission was incomplete. So this attitude compelled the Africans to use armed struggle for regaining their lost independence. And then the another one was many Portuguese were illiterates. It means that many Portuguese were illiterates thus ignorant about the outside world, especially of the new form of imperialism. Portugal believed that granting independence to her colonies meant the end of exploitation. Hence, it became reluctant to grant independence to its colonies. It means that the men of Portuguese were illiterates. They had no ability to interpret the various issues that concerning with the present world, because many of the European countries easily they were known about what is going on. It means that to grant independence was not the end of colonization or was not the end of exploitation of their former colonies. So due to the illiteracy of the Portuguese, they were reluctant to grant the independence to our colonies because she saw that could be the end of exploiting the natural resources which were present in those colonies. Nonetheless, Angola and Mozambique were able to acquire independence after prolonged armed struggle. So, nonetheless, Angola and Mozambique were able to acquire their independence through the use of armed struggle. So let us see the contribution of Pan-Africanism to the rise of nationalism. The contribution of Pan-Africanism to the rise of nationalism. As we saw that the Pan-Africanism movement was that movement that were aimed at uniting all African or peoples of African origin in the New World and Africa at large to be free or to decolonize from the colonial rule. So you can see that there are various movements that were taking place under Pan-Africanism movement, whereby various conferences were held, like the first conference that were held in 1900. So these all conferences and other conferences were taken place or were conducted in order to discuss on how Africa will liberate themselves from the colonial domination. And so let us see the contribution of Pan-Africanism to the rise of African nationalism. And the first one is the Pan-Africanist movement united all Africans from all walks of life to oppose colonialism. It means that Pan-Africanist movement was aiming at to unite all people of Africans, to eliminate or to oppose all works of colonialism or all kind form of colonization in African countries. The common desire for independence was a unifying factor that terminated tribal interest. It means that the common desire for independence was a unifying factor that terminated the tribal interest, so that they could be united as the one, or to unite to be the oneness, in order to have the common interest of attaining the complete independence in the African countries. So that's why Pan-Africanism movement or Pan-Africanism played a great role to the rise of nationalism in African countries, by uniting all Africans to become easy to oppose colonial rule, because the struggle for independence were done regardless their tribe, their regions, or whatever. So that's why the Africans were united to be the one and fight against the colonial rule to get their independence. But also the government provided a platform, or it means that the government provided a platform where Africans could discuss the grievances caused by colonialism. It means that the government that was formed under Pan-Africanist movement, it means that movement had their leaders. So they given a platform or the room for the African countries that were represented by their leader to discuss the grievances caused by colonialism. In all of these congresses or conferences which were held in different parts of the world, like in Manchester, like in Paris, and Bandung in Indonesia, all these conferences were aiming at discussing the grievances that were caused by colonialism. So in all of these congresses or conferences of the movement, the people of African origin discussed about implementing the spirit of oneness among all the black people all over the world. And that, from that discussion that were done under the conference of Pan-Africanist movement, we are providing the various techniques and measures which would be taken by the African leaders to organize and to unite the people to be the one and fight for their independence in their respective countries. And that's why we can consider that Pan-Africanism contributed much or played a great role in the African nationalism. But the third one was the movement awakened the interest of the African to fight for independence. It means that the movement or the Pan-Africanism awakened or raised the interest of the Africans to fight for their independence. As I have told you that during the conferences which were held or attended during the Pan-Africanist conferences which were held in different parts of the world to discuss the evils that were done under colonialism. During the conference of the Pan-Africanism movement, members discussed a wide range about the grievances or problems that were caused by colonialism. So, such as racial discrimination, unfair taxation policies, and land alienation which they were facing under colonial rule. It means that during the Pan-Africanist conferences which were held in different areas in the world, it means that the leaders who represented their respective countries were given the platform or the room to discuss in wide range of issues or matters that were caused by colonialism, such as racial discrimination. It means the Africans were discriminated due to their races, and unfair taxation policies. It means that the African countries or in their colonies, there were introduction of various or unfair taxes. For example, poly-tax, ati-tax, matiti tax, and the ati-tax were the kind of tax or which were unfair to the Africans, and that were acted as the hindrance to the Africans, as well as land alienation, whereby the Africans, or most of Africans, became landless, which they were facing under colonial rule. So all these issues were discussed under the Pan-Africanism Conference or Pan-Africanist Congress. So in one way or another, due to the discussion of these issues in a wide range, led to the rise or awaken the interest of the Africans toward the struggle for African nationalism. But the fourth reason, the fourth contribution of Pan-Africanism was the Pan-African Congress or conferences chose a total liberation in their struggle. Sorry, this is the fifth. We are on the contribution number 4. The Pan-African movement played a big role or a vital role in the rise of African nationalism because it is stressed that the fight for political independence by the Africans was a necessary step towards the complete economic and social emancipation. It means that the Pan-African movement played a great role by addressing that to the Africans. The fighting for the African independence is just a vital or important step towards the complete economic and social emancipation among the Africans. So that's why planted the spirit among the Africans. It means that the spirit of nationalism was planted in the minds of the African leaders and Africans majority to get the spirit of fighting or struggling to attain their independence, which were lost under the colonial rule. So that's why you see many African countries in 1960 were started to fight against the colonial domination in order to attain their self-rule, which were lost under the colonial rule. So those Africans, they were decided to fight for political independence by the Africans was a necessary step towards the emancipation in economic and social matters. Another contribution was that the Pan-African Congress chose total liberation in their struggle for independence from Manchester. It means that the Pan-African Congress chose the total liberation in the struggle of independence for the African countries during the Manchester Conference. The activities of the movement were shifted to Africa following the independence of Ghana in 1975, whereby the headquarters of Pan-African movement was shifted to the Accra, the capital city of Ghana, after Ghana got the independence in 1957 under Kwame Nkrumah, who was the leader or the first president of Ghana. So the capital city of the headquarters of Pan-African movement was shifted from the Afro-Arab nations to Ghana in order to supervise and to control all activities concerning in supporting the other African countries to attain their independence. The capital city of Ghana, Accra, became the headquarters of Pan-Africanism, where Kwame Nkrumah spearheaded the independence of many African countries. And you can see that the president of Ghana, or the president under Kwame Nkrumah, was aided the independence of the many African countries. As we Tanganyikans, or Tanzanians by today, the Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere got a much support from Kwame Nkrumah because he was the leader or the head of Pan-Africanism or Pan-African movement. So that's why the Pan-African movement or Pan-Africanism played a great role to the rise or to the African nationalism struggle. But the fifth contribution was the movement represented the African continent in the international conferences, especially in the United Nations Organization or UNO. The United Nations Organization wanted to make African nations to attain their independence. As we know that the movement or Pan-Africanism was represented the African continent in the international conferences. For example, AU, African Union, and and United Nations organizations, whereby those conferences, the African countries were given the chance to express their problems which were facing them during the colonial rule. So by getting that chance, or that room, or that platform, the Africans were given out their problems or grievances that were caused by colonialism, and those international organizations like the UN was played a great role in supporting the African countries to attain their independence, and the United Nations organization was pressurized much the European countries or European powers, or we can call them colonial powers, to grant the independence for the African countries. As we can take an example from Tanganyika, by that time under Julius Kambarage Nyerere, as was the leader of nationalistic movement in Tanganyika, the United Nations was given the much support to Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, and the UN tried to pressurize Britain or British rule to grant the independence to the Tanganyikans, because they believed that Tanganyikans by that time were ready to rule themselves. So that's why we consider that the Pan-African movement was played a great role to the rise of African nationalism. So these were the roles that were played by the Pan-African movement toward the rise of African nationalism. So after there, we can see the role of the Second World War in the rise of African nationalism. It means that the role of the Second World War to the rise of African nationalism. Before looking that, I would like to explain a little bit about the Second World War. It means that this was the World War II that was happened in 1939 up to 1945, after the two camps, Axis power and Allied power, come into physical fighting, whereby the one side was represented by German and the other side was represented by Britain with their allies. So that was the Second World War. But the Second World War had different effects in the world, even in Africa, whereby in the world there was destruction of industries, but agricultural plantations was destroyed. The people's lives were lost. Even the world economies was decreased or was collapsed. That led to the most of European countries to decline in their economies as the result of the effects of Second World War. So these were some effects of Second World War, but the Second World War were led to some impacts in Africa, like the rise of African nationalism. So there where we are going to stick, to mean that the effects of Second World War to the rise of African nationalism, as was among of the effects of Second World War in African continent. It means that Second World War led to the rise of African nationalism. So you can see that the rise of African nationalism, but the Second World War led to the intensification of African exploitation or exploitation of African resources by the colonial power. But also the Africans were got some techniques of fighting when after the ex-soldiers were returned from the war. But also the African lives were lost during the war, because the Africans, almost all the Africans, especially the young people or the young men of Africa were taken by their colonial masters to fight on their behalf. So some Africans were lost their lives. So these were some impacts of the Second World War, but I've mentioned one, the impacts of of Second World War, as it led to the rise of African nationalism, is that where we are going to see. It means the role of the Second World War in the rise of African nationalism. So the first role means that the Second World War played a great role in the rise of nationalism or African nationalism by doing the following things. The first one was the formation of UN or UNO, United Nations Organization. It means that that international organization was formed in 1945 after the end of the Second World War. And the UN was the international organization which was the main objective was to maintain the world peace and security throughout the world. The UN formed the Trusteeship Council, which had to make sure all colonies gained their independence by using peaceful means. It means that under the United Nations formed the Trusteeship Council that was given the mandatory to the European powers to prepare some African countries for getting their independence when they will be ready. So the UN formed the Trusteeship Council, which had to make sure all colonies gain their independence by using peaceful means. Tanganyika is one of the countries that benefited from UN because it was a trusteeship territory under the British rule. So we can see that Tanganyika was among of the countries or the African countries that was benefited from the UN Trusteeship Council, which was being provided to Britain to be the mandatory territory of Britain. But when it reached in 1961, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, by his support, Tanganyika got independence in that year, and Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere became the first president of Tanganyika. So let us see the second role or contribution of the Second World War to the rise of African nationalism. It means that the Second World War led to the rise of the USA. After the Second World War, USA emerged as the leading economic and political power, and USA introduced the open door policy, through which USA needed raw materials, markets, and area for investment from overseas. Hence, support for decolonization became paramount so as to have access to these needs in the colonies, and the USA put decolonization as the condition for European economic reconstruction, which was the Marshall Plan. It means that as USA became the leading superpower of the world in economic and political power, USA placed some conditions that the European powers must decolonize or must grant the independence to the African countries in order for her to be simple or to be easy in getting in getting our demands, like area for investment, area for getting the market of manufactured goods, and raw materials for our industries. So the main condition which was brought by USA was the open door policy, where the USA wanted to get those demands, but she came up with the European economic reconstruction, which was under Marshall Plan, and the Marshall Plan was providing the economic assistance or financial assistance to the European countries which were eaten by the Second World War. And in order to qualify to get those financial assistance was all those economic that European countries were supposed to grant the independence to the African countries. So in one way or another, the rise of USA led to the rise of the decolonization process as a result of the Second World War. By the third one was the rise of the USSR. As we know that after the Second World War, there was the emergence of Cold War. The emergence of Cold War, not or an actual fighting. It means that the Russia Revolution that took place in 1917 contributed to the formation of the USSR, or Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, that was under Russia. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republic became a leader. So another role of the Second World War to the decolonization process of African countries was the role played by the returned of soldiers or returned soldiers. It means that the role played by the returned soldiers from the Second World War. The war widened the political horizons of Africans who were involved in the war. So the Africans came to know the meaning of freedom and democracy. They knew now to use weapons and participate in the struggle. The Africans witnessed the defeat of the whites, and hence the soldiers become active in fighting toward their independence. So you can see that the role of returned soldiers who came from the Second World War. So they witnessed that the whites also they can be defeated. So they become active and come up with various techniques which could be used in the struggle for their independence. So in one way or another, the Second World War contributed much on building the Africans in their mind to know the various techniques and methods that could be used in fighting against the colonialists to get their independence. And thus the soldiers like the Dan Kimathi in Kenya was participated in Mau Mau War to eliminate the British rule, and that was the result of the Second World War. So after that, I would like to wind up there and giving you the questions, almost 2 questions. And the first question is, explain the role played by USA and USSR in the decolonization process in Africa. And you have to give 3 points per each. And the second one is, show the reasons for the use of armed struggle in Portuguese colonies in the struggle of independence. So until there, I would like to wind up my lesson. I wish you to meet in the next session for more learning, and I welcome you to proceed learning with Edukea Tanzania. We provide the best quality learning materials that fits you. So welcome in the next session to proceed with another topics and another lessons. Thank you for watching.
Purchase your tracks today.